Hello, everyone. Phil Pravda here from Suit Cafe, suitcafe.com. Another episode of It's All Been Done Before. Yes, my podcast. And for those of you who are used to listening to me, you know I don't have that very many episodes that are coming out all the time. And this is going to be a very different episode. This is going to be an episode in homage to my father. I'm not going to have any intro, any outro. And I know I may talk for about an hour, which is the usual sort of length of my podcast episodes. I have no script. I don't read any notes. I'm just talking, off the top of my head as I always do. And but this is different. A couple of weeks ago, my father passed away, and unfortunately, and he was a pioneer in the men's clothing business. And I think the internet is a great place if you want people to remember your legacy, or family members who may be too young or don't know about other family members. You could easily get their legacy up on the internet, whether it's Instagram post or a podcast or a YouTube video about that person, or do one episode or multiple episodes as new memories come to you. You can memorialize those people, and I'd like to do that now for my father. And I think for many of you, it might be very interesting hearing how the family started in the clothing business, different stories about clothing and his philosophy on clothing and on customer service and on building stores in New York City, and his relationship maybe that he had with his father, my grandfather, who was also even a really big pioneer in the menswear business, starting when no one went to Europe. He was one of the first who went. So hopefully you find it interesting. I'm just going to talk about different things, different topics, not going to have any music on this podcast, like I said before. And of course, no guests, just me talking. And I'll start, actually, it was very interesting to me today, because today, I could tell you, my father passed away. It was December 12th, 2025. Today is New Year's Day, 2026, January 1. So Happy New Year to everyone. I should have said it in the beginning, but all right, I'm saying it now. And it was a sad day, of course, December 12th, but I couldn't believe what I found out later that day, that December 12th was also the birthday of Frank Sinatra. And my father loved Frank Sinatra. He was a Frank Sinatra fan as long as I can remember, me being a little kid. He was a Frank Sinatra fan. Listened to it in the car, 8-track, listened to it on cassette, listened to it on CD. He had reel-to-reel tapes. When I spoke at the, I don't even remember what I said at the funeral, but when I spoke at the funeral, or I may have said this, or I wrote it and I took it out of my little speech that I made, that my father had a reel-to-reel tape. For anybody who knows what that is, it's like a box, and you have these sort of 8 or 10-inch plates that have tape, like cassette tape sort of stuff on them, and it's reel to reel. The two reels are moving, and he had a microphone connected to it, and he used to play Sinatra on a record and sing his own voice into the reel to reel. So if you want to say that it was like sort of like the beginning of TikTok, he was doing it back in the early 70s. I don't know. But that's what it was, recording his own voice, Sinatra in the background on the record player. And he was holding me, whether I was 3 or 4 years old. He was singing the songs, holding me, dancing around in the living room. I remember that very, very well. So it was Sinatra's birthday, the day that he passed away, which I thought was maybe not a coincidence, because, I was in the hospital with him the day before, which was on the 11th, but he actually didn't pass away until it was actually December 12th. So that was something that was, interesting. But so what I wanted to say was today, I get a phone call from this gentleman, and he was a salesman in the clothing store on Madison Avenue, 51st and Madison, British American. That's my father's clothing store, going back to the early 1980s. Now, first, this particular guy, he worked for my uncle in his clothing store that was on 8th Street in the Village. That was a different business. Had nothing to do with my father, my family. That was my uncle's business. My grandfather had a piece of that business too. He didn't have a piece of my father's business. He had a piece of my uncle's business, but that's a whole separate story. And he worked there for many years. And then when something happened, or he wanted to do something a little different, he got a job working for my father. So everyone sort of had their own clothing stores. My grandfather was in business at the time when my father was with him, and then my father went on his own. And I had 2 uncles. One was on his own in the Village. The other was on his own downtown near Barney's on 17th Street. He had his own business. My grandfather had his hand in, which ones did he own? He owned his own. And he also owned a piece of the one that was in the Village. That was my father's and not my other uncle's shoe business. He didn't have a piece of that. My other uncle was on his own. And so he called me today, this gentleman, and he said, he wanted to, I guess through other people, he heard what had happened, and he wanted to, send his condolences. And I do keep in touch with him over these many, many years. He told me he's 72 now. He's 72 years old. And I know him. And he told me he knows my father since my father was a young guy in his 20s. They sort of grew up together, in the clothing stores, because there were so many clothing stores that the family had. And we sort of had the same salespeople working within the clothing stores, although they were different stores and they were working for different owners. When one wanted to change, jobs or do something a little different or move to a different part of the city, they say, "Hey, I'll go work for Paul." My father's name was Paul. So he was working down in the village and he said, "Nah, I want to go uptown. I'm going to go to Madison Avenue. That's the wealthy people. Madison Avenue, or the tourists are over there, the hotels. He has nice merchandise. He sells all the big brand names. I'm going to try and work for Paul. So I'm going to give Paul a call." And my father gave him a job. And he worked for us for a very long time. Even when I was there, when we had the store on 51st Street and then we had the store on 44th Street, my father opened on 44th Street in 1986. Yeah, in 1986, he opened on 44th Street. And then this gentleman still worked for us even when we had the store on 5th Avenue, which I opened, which was in 1992. So, and he was with us the whole time until something happened. I don't know. And then he was telling me the story today because he called me. And he said, I would call your father on the phone, even though he was retired and I was retired. And we would joke around. I would say to your father, "You remember that time you fired me?" He would tell my father, "You remember that time you fired me?" And my father said, "What? I never fired you." He said, "Yeah, you fired me. You don't remember the time you fired me?" And my father said, "You know what? It was a mistake. I should never have fired you." So they had that kind of, the old time salesman in stores where you got along with your boss. Everybody was like a little family. You're working together with the customers. That's really how it was. And to think somebody from way back then is calling me now because, my father passed away and he wants to, pay his respects and say, your father was such a great guy. He was always so good to me all the time, always very fair in business. He knew what he was doing. He had great taste level. He knew what to pick. He knew what people wanted. He knew what brands to buy. He knew what new brands to buy that no one ever heard of that became big brands. And all those things were true. And of course I said, "Thank you so much. I appreciate you calling." We had a nice conversation. We spoke about an hour and we talk about old times and new times. And we joke around about all kinds of stuff. So, it's a fun conversation. So my mother got a call from another gentleman and he now lives in Tennessee. And he also worked for my father in the early 1980s, like 1981, 1982. My father first went out on his own like the late 70s, 78, 79. So I remember him very well being in the store at 51st and Madison, this other gentleman. And he got a hold of my mother and he called her up and I said, "Oh, I heard what happened with Paul and I just want to, wish you my condolences and say, he was a great guy. We got along and everything." So another salesman who, was with the family for a very, very long time. There's a few other ones out there. I tried to find them online. I'm not in touch with them. There's a few other salesmen. I know there's another few guys who I was in touch with for many, many years. And I know one passed away already. But, those were the years where you had a salesman in a store. Let's say you were the customer and you had a salesman in the store and you kept going back to that same salesman. People really like that. Now everybody makes a joke now. "Oh, you need a doctor? I got a guy. You want a suit? I got a guy. You want a dentist? I got a guy." Everyone's got a guy. But in those years, it was really true. "Oh, you need to buy some great suits? You go to that store, go see my guy. He's been there. He's been there 20 years in the store and he knows what he's doing and they got a great tailor and he'll set you up and he'll pick out some beautiful things. He's got a good taste level." And you had someone who had a career as a clothing salesman, not people now who jump around. "I'm in Saks for 2 years and then I'm going to Bergdorf for 1 year and then I'm working in the Gap for a year and a half and then I'm going to do something on my own and then that didn't work out and I became a salesman again. And then after 10 years of jumping from place to place, jumping, after all those years, they decide, okay, I'm going to go in business for myself. There's nothing wrong with that, to go in business for yourself. But they think because they had 10 years of jumping around from place to place to place, and maybe they worked 1 year in Gucci and they worked 2 years in Dolce & Gabbana, that they actually know something about the clothing business. And I see these guys online all the time. There's a lot of them. I mean, there's so many on Instagram, especially, and they're on because everybody posts the same stuff. Whatever they post on Instagram, they post on TikTok, and they're posting it on Facebook. It's all the same stuff. And if your algorithm works, which the algorithms do work, when you watch one thing, the algorithm starts to show you the same stuff over and over. So when I'm on Instagram and I see a clothing guy saying, look at my coat. I can make it for you. It's made with Laura Piana, and it's made with this, and I could put a lining, and I can make it longer, and I can make it shorter. And then you see the same guy saying the same thing on Facebook and the same guy saying the same thing on Instagram because the algorithm has you locked in. You see the same thing over and over. But what do they really know about what they're doing and what they're selling? And you know what? Since all these guys, all of them, really, they're all in custom clothes. Why? Why did they all get into custom clothes? And I'll tell you why they all got into custom clothes, because the custom clothing business has almost $0 barrier to entry, right? It's almost costs you nothing these days to get into the custom clothing. Why is that? Because you have factories all over the world. You could go on the internet and you could find them. It's easy now. You don't have to get on a plane. Like years ago when my father and my grandfather started. Sure, my grandfather started selling clothing that was, things made in America. Why? Because the factories were in America. He would take a train and go to Baltimore, or take a train and go to upstate New York, where there were factories making clothes, and you could see them making the suits, and you could pick the fabric there, and you could say, "Oh, make me 1,000 suits. I want to do a cutting. I'll tell you a story about my grandfather doing a cutting of suits. 1,000 suits, I'll make 1,000. Let me pick the fabrics and make me a couple single-breasteds and a few double-breasteds. Those years, 3-button, maybe it was in, maybe it wasn't. I really don't. I read way before my time, let me tell you. But then years later in the 1950s, my grandfather, he went to Europe. Now, who was going to Europe in the late 1950s on one of the first jet airplanes? Not many people were going there. So he went to France and he went to Italy. And I remember my grandparents going many times, would take a plane and they would go to Europe. And it was like, wow, it was an unbelievable thing. Because if you went to Europe in those years, you couldn't even call New York. I mean, it was very tough. There was no phone to call. There was no pay phone, certainly no cell phone. Even the hotel didn't have, to get a long distance line, it was like you got to wait to get a long distance line. You just couldn't pick up the phone and dial and say, oh, this is New York. And nowadays you FaceTime somebody and they could be halfway around the world and it's like you're right with them. I mean, it's insane. It's great. I mean, it's really great. But I remember I was telling somebody, my family, we always stayed in the Excelsior Hotel in Florence, Italy for many, many, many years. Going back, my grandparents stayed there and I stayed there with my parents and my grandparents and my cousins. We all stayed in that hotel. And I remember the first time I went to Italy, I think was 1979, when we wanted to call the store to see what was going on, you just couldn't pick up a phone and call. You had to go to the basement of the hotel. They had a little operator there, like a switchboard. You would say, I need to get a long distance line to New York. Here's the phone number. They would say, okay, come back in 10 minutes. So you would leave, go to the lobby, and then maybe while you're in the lobby, they would buzz the concierge from the basement of the hotel, and they would say, okay, your call is going through. You would go back downstairs, and they had these little phone booths that were in the basement. And it was a nice basement. It's Italy, remember. It's not like a basement in Manhattan. You would go to the basement, go into the little phone booth, and then when the phone would ring, you would pick up, and they would say, connecting your call, and boom, you were connected to New York, your clothing store, or somebody you were calling. And you would only talk for a short amount of time because you had to pay for the call right then at that moment. How much is the call? Hey, do you have to give me 1,200 lira? There was no euros then. It was all lira. So you had to pay for the call at that moment or put the call on your hotel bill. So I remember that as a kid, making those kind of calls. So it's not like today where, instantaneously you're calling anywhere in the world anytime you want or texting or whatever it is. And my grandfather, my grandparents, they were, really early adopters of going to Europe and buying clothing and bringing it back to sell here in New York in the clothing store. So they would go to Italy and they would go to France and they went to Spain. It wasn't about the brand name per se. It was just about getting something nice, getting some good quality, good looking stuff. And of course, they wanted to pay a decent price. And the prices were pretty good in Europe at those years. Every country had its own currency. So you had the French franc and you had the Italian lira and you had the Spanish, I think it's pesos, no? Still in Spain, I think. And anyway, so that's how it, so that's how it was. That's what they did. And my father went on some of those trips with his father too. And then when my father went on his own, I remember in 1979, 1980, I went to Italy that year. I was like 11. I went to Italy that year with my parents 4 times because the store was just getting going. So how are they going to find suppliers? How are they going to find good quality clothing to buy and bring back to New York? And it wasn't just like, okay, call FedEx and send it all FedEx. It didn't work that way those years. You had to have a freight forwarder, which there are many freight forwarders in business today, but you had to have a separate company that you would call and make arrangements, and then that company would go pick up your clothing when it was ready in the factory and take it from the factory to the airport, and then from the airport get it on a plane. Then it would go to the brokerage, which was near the airport in New York, usually JFK, and then it had to go through customs. You had to fill out the customs forms, pay the customs bill, and then you could get a delivery of your merchandise. So everything took a lot of time and everything took a lot of money. And also you had to beware because you're buying from a company that, you really don't know. They really don't know you. So how are you going to guarantee you're ordering merchandise that they want to get paid for, right? They also have to front the money to buy the raw materials to make the merchandise for you. Maybe they're asking you for a deposit. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're giving you credit terms. Maybe they're not. So there were a lot of different negotiations going on those years. And it's all been changed around after many, many years in the clothing business, 35 years myself. And my father was 50 years. And my grandfather was 50 years before that. And I've been with them all this time. So I've seen a lot of negotiations go on for all different types of things. If you're giving, sometimes we would pay by letter of credit. So letter of credit through the banks. You'd go to your banker and say, I need a letter of credit. You fill out the documents. You have your pro forma invoice, and you made sure that your invoice was the same as the invoice that the factory was shipping the goods to you. And you always got a discount for letter of credit because letter of credit was really that the manufacturer was getting all the money in advance in one shot. While they were shipping the goods at the same time. That's really how that worked. They would ship the goods if the invoices were the same and all the numbers were the same, there couldn't be any discrepancy because that would cause a problem. Then the letter of credit was open and then the manufacturer could get the money from your bank account and they were satisfied that you were satisfied that they shipped it on time. They were satisfied that they got that money on time and then the transaction was over. And then you waited for the flight to get to New York or wherever and then you got it shipped by truck from the freight forwarder after it went through customs to your door. And that's usually how it worked. So in later years, a lot of the manufacturers decided that they were going to sell merchandise landed in dollars, the bigger ones. So they figured out their prices from euros or liras into US dollars, and the shipping was included. So if you bought a suit, let's say the suit cost you $300, within that $300 as your wholesale price, the shipping and the trucking to your door and the trucking from the factory to the airport in Italy, all those things were all included in that price. And that's the price that you paid to your door. That's called landed duty paid, pretty much. And you didn't have any extra charges that you had to pay for. You knew that was your cost base. You could make your retail price from that cost base, and that's how it went. But in my father's early days, like I was saying, when we went to Europe in 1979, that's not what we did. And how were we going to find these people? There was no internet. There was no yellow pages, of course. And the best way was to read the Italian fashion magazines. And we used to read L'Uomo Vogue. L'Uomo Vogue is the men's Vogue. And the Men's Vogue was a big, thick magazine. And we used to look through it, and we used to look at all the ads. And we could tell, I was young, but my father could tell very easily that from a photograph, and I do that, I could tell very easily now. From a photograph, you could tell someone has unbelievable quality manufacturing and clothing just by the way it's fitting on the model, or you could tell by the way the fabric looks. And it was and I do that today. I find a lot of suppliers on Instagram, and I see suppliers, whether they're making gloves or scarves or a sport coat or different types of fabrics. And I could say, whoa, this is something that's nice. I have to contact these people because I could see they make a really, really nice product. And I'd like to inquire about me selling it to my customers if we can work out some arrangement. And I did that actually with one of the most well-known and oldest companies in Scotland for Scottish tartan plaids. So that was something new for me this season, the Scottish tartan plaids. So I got in contact with them, and they have beautiful fabrics. And they said, yeah, go on our website, pick out any fabrics that you want, and we'll send you the swatches, as many as you want. And they did. They sent me these beautiful large rectangles of tartan plaids from Scotland, a beautiful 100% wool. And I was showing them to my customers to sell them. So I made beautiful sport coats for people in very different looking Scottish plaids that, get this, nobody else has it. So it's not the same thing you're seeing every day with all these custom made guys on Instagram. Oh, I'm making a pinstripe suit, or I'm making some black coat, or I'm making something else that looks ridiculous on them because they have no clue what is going on. Honestly, there's no clue there. And now you have something that's very, very different. If you look at my YouTube channel, I made a video of one of the tartan plaids I made in a sport coat. Most of these are for sport coats. A tartan plaid suit is a little bold in my opinion, but they're mostly for sport coats. A couple of guys might want a pair of tartan plaid pants, but most for sport coats. But I do them different. I do the zipper insert inside. I could do it in cashmere. I can make the insert the same color as the tartan if you wanted to, but that's not my particular taste, actually, to make it all the same color. But anyway, a lot of different things you could do with those things. So we read L'Uomo Vogue, and we would see shirt companies or suit companies or tie companies, and we would note the address of the company and the phone number that was on the bottom of in the magazine. And then we went to Italy. That's right. Then we would go to Italy because, there was no email. You couldn't send a fax. There was no way to contact these people except for calling them on the telephone. There was something called a telex, which you had to pay a lot of money for. And we used to make the reservations in the hotel in Italy by telex. My father used to send a telex to the hotel where, it's those things that you see in the old movies where it's typing, blah, 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 stop, blah, 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 stop, blah, 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 stop, like a broken message, and there's a stop in between. So that's the end of the sentence. So they used to send a telex saying, oh, we're going to be arriving this day. We need a hotel room this day. How many people we're going to be. This is how many people are going to be. And then and you didn't have your own telex machine. I think my uncle did buy one at one time, but you didn't have your own telex. I don't even know where my father would use the telex machine from. Maybe the bank had a telex machine. I didn't even know where he used a telex, but he used to send a telex to the hotel to make the hotel reservation, and they used to reply by telex, right? They used to say, okay, you're arriving this day, you're arriving that day. Okay, we have one room for you. We have two rooms for you. This is the price. Is it okay? And then you respond, it's okay. And then you had your reservation, right? And people also used travel agents. Then also, we did have a travel agent that was in actually a building on 56th and Lexington Avenue on the corner. My grandfather owned that building across the street where he had a clothing store called House of Cromwell, which was like the hippest store in the 60s and 70s to go to. That was like the place to buy all your skin shoes and bell-bottom pants, and everybody buying their Saturday Night Fever looking polyester shirts with the wide collars and silk shirts. They had all that stuff in that store. Platform shoes and boots and, lizard and snake skin shoes. My grandfather had all that kind of stuff in his store. And it was a really hip place to go shopping. So across the street in a building that he bought on the second floor was a travel agent. And they used to use that travel agent as their travel agent. And I know some people still use travel agents today, but you could really everyone knows you could do it all yourself. Expedia, Orbitz, is a zillion things online. You can go direct also if you want to. But anyway, they used to use travel agents, and or they used telex, and that's how they did it back then. So we went to, we had the addresses of these places. We went to Europe, and it was a very old world European charm in those years because there weren't that many people the planes were busy, but it wasn't like a normal thing like, oh, I'm going to Europe now, and then I'm going to Europe again in another 6 months, and I'm going to go in another 6 months. Not a lot of people did that those years. Now people fly, as you know, all over. Every minute somebody's flying someplace, and it's not a big deal just to hop on a plane and go and come back. It's like nothing. Those years was a little different. So we had the addresses of these companies from their L'Uomo Vogue ads. And then when we got to the hotel, we would say to the concierge, because he spoke Italian and we didn't, can you please call up these people, see if they have a showroom in Florence or a showroom in Milan, or we can go to the factory, we'll hire a car and a driver and we'll go see them in their factory. We'd like to see their collection. We'd like to see their product to buy it for our store in New York. And then the concierge had a little project. The concierge, that's what he did. He made the phone calls for you. Of course, you got to give him a few bucks. He made the phone calls for you. And that's how we got to find some really, really good quality clothing, men's clothing factories. And one of those factories was Canali. That's right, Canali. And if you know the clothing business, if you know menswear, you know Canali. Probably still today, the best fitting men's garment in its price range on the market today anywhere in the world. In my view, because I sold it for 30 years, uninterrupted, season after season after season, and I was in the factory too. I met the owner, Dr. Eugenio Canali. I'm sure he's not alive, and I still know Paolo Canali and Giorgio Canali and the Canali family. I saw them many, many, many times. They invited me to baseball games. We used to go to the Yankees or to the Mets, and I went to some movie premieres with them where they did the clothing for the movie premieres. So, it was an interesting time over the many years that I've been in the clothing business. So we found Canali and we found a whole slew of other clothing companies. Years later, we used to go to the not too many years later. See, that was 79. So maybe 80, 81, we started to go to the Pitti Uomo. That was the premier men's clothing show in Florence, which still goes on today. But Pitti Uomo, again, was very tiny back in those years. Now it's a whole big expo. But back then, it was in a small space called Palazzo dei Congressi. I remember it very well. Palazzo dei Congressi was like the small little area right in the center of Florence practically. And there was a big hotel across, I think it was across the street. But the train station was there, the Stazione was there. And the hotel was called the Hotel Baglioni. The Hotel Baglioni is still there. It's been renovated since, of course. But the Baglioni Hotel, those years, they didn't really use air conditioning. So you'd walk through the clothing show, going to different booths of different manufacturers. And I would walk with my father when I was a kid. And there was always a book that they gave you when you walked in. There was always like giveaways, keychains or books about the different clothing and little shopping bags they would give you or tote bags and stuff. And I would walk with my father and my mother. And my brother and sister were too young. They had to stay back in New York. But and they had a book with a map of who was where, like what manufacturers were where. And we didn't really know many of them, but we were looking for new up-and-coming manufacturers. These were not really designers, not like a one person, like I'm Mr. Dolce & Gabbana. I'm Mr. Dolce. No. I'm Mr. Gabbana. No. Or that's not really what it was. These were factories that were mostly family-owned. And they wanted to show their products at a show, and they wanted to have people from around the world come and buy from them, and then they would make it for you, and they would ship it. So we used to see them at this expo. It was at the Palazzo dei Congressi, and it was like a little mini palace is really what it was. And we used to walk around, and I had the map. Inside the book was the map. And my father used to say, okay, Philip, you got to tell me where I'm going to go, because he wanted to look in all the booths. And I kept us sort of on the right path to make sure we didn't miss any areas of this entire complex to make sure we saw everything. That's really what it was. So I used to keep track. Oh, we already went down that hallway. Let's go down this hallway. And we used to see all the different things. And that's how I learned how to spot how to really notice really good and nice clothing. We used to walk into a booth and say hello to the people, and everybody's smoking cigarettes those days. And I got to know a lot of people in the clothing business. Of course, most of the people that I knew back then, they're not around in the clothing business anymore. There are a few that I see at clothing shows today when I go, and I tell them my last name, and they go, was your grandfather this or was your father that? I said, yeah, that's my father. That's my grandfather. Because they say, oh my God, I used to sell him so much clothes back in the days, so they say. I used to sell him so much clothing. He was such a nice guy, such a great guy. But the most important thing that they always said about my father, and I guess about my grandfather too, but that he was already older and I didn't really see him work as much as I saw my father work. They always said he paid his bills on time. They always said that. He always paid his bills on time. Because obviously, when you get a reputation of paying your bills on time, what happens? people want to do business with you. They hear about you and they want to do more business with you. People that you don't even know, they call you up. They say, "Oh, I make a beautiful shirt in Italy. I got to see my construction of the shirt. I love my shirt is the best shirt in Italy." Whether it's the best shirt or not, you don't know, but they heard you pay your bills on time. They want to sell you their product. And that's how it went. After that few times going to Italy, then people start to find you. Right? Not to mention also later years. I'm not talking about the 1980s. I'm talking about the 1990s. The 80s was still mostly you had to go to Italy to find the stuff. Some Italians were coming here. Some of them that got big, Canali got big, and Corneliani got big, and Brioni got big, and Zegna became big by 1990. They were bigger. Those companies, they were able to come to America and have showrooms in New York, and they started to open stores in New York. But years prior to that, they had no showrooms. They had no stores. They had nothing here. You had to go there. And there was no emails, like I said. You had to go and show your face that you're a real person with a real store. You had to bring your labels with you. And if you wanted your name in their garment with their name too. So we had one side of the suit said Canali, and one side of the suit said British American House. That was the name of my father's store. We had 3 or 4 of those all at the same time. British American House on the other side. And then eventually Canali decided, we want to make a combo label with you. So the label said Canali exclusively for British American House. Canali used to do that. So they had the labels all in the factory in Italy. They were making them for us. So it was a much easier thing to do. And at those years, they had no shirts and ties, Canali. They only had suits. It was only suits and sport jackets and overcoats and pants. There were no shirts and no ties and no sportswear and no shoes and no now everybody has like luggage, like duffel bags or briefcases. None of that leather goods didn't exist. That came many, many, many years later. I remember the first year that they started to sell shirts. They said, "Oh, we're working with a shirt factory. They're making shirts for us." They were testing the waters. Could they sell shirts? Who's going to buy how many shirts? How are the shirts going to sell? And when they did very well with shirts, what do you think they did? They bought the shirt factory because they want to own it. They don't want to farm out their shirt production. They want to have control over their quality, over their manufacturing, over the pricing. And I know that family very well, the Canali family. They have excellent control over everything they do. Everything is run by the family there. So that's how they run their business. What they're doing exactly today in today's market, aside from seeing the product, I don't sell their product already for at least 10 or 11 years. So I'm not so in tune with what's going on in the factories, what's going on in their factories. I do know they open stores all over the world. They have stores everywhere. They have stores in Kuala Lumpur. They have stores in China. They had stores in Russia. I don't know if they still do. All over Europe, they have stores. All over America, they have stores. Mexico City, South America. So there's stores everywhere. That Canali has. So that's how, we were able to, my father was able to find the brands just by looking at the magazines. And that's not unlike how my grandfather did it years and years prior, my great-grandfather even, years and years prior, when my great-grandfather, when he opened his first store for himself in 1908 on 14th Street and 7th Avenue in Manhattan. When he opened his first store, where do you think he was going to get the clothes from? He was selling used clothes. So where is he getting used clothes? He was getting used clothes from people that would die. If somebody would die and they were famous, he would go to their house and tell the widow, "Look, you don't need the clothes in the closet anymore. The guy's dead. I'll give you cash for the clothes." And the rich people had nice clothes. So that's how he got his nice inventory. I never knew him, but that's how he got his nice inventory. He was able to go to their homes, and he did that all the time. And he had a nice inventory of secondhand used clothes, but he gave the customers, and this is basically where the family, sort of my family, where our philosophy comes from, that sure, you have to make a profit on the clothes. You're in business to make a profit, to make money for yourself, to make money for the business, so it keeps going. But you have to give the customers value. That's the whole thing here. Just because some of these new guys, and I could see right away, these new guys on Instagram, I could see a suit, they go, "Oh, the suit is we're selling for $2,500 our suit." And I could say, "This is a piece of junk made in China." I could see right away that that's a suit made in China. It must cost them $200, and they're selling it for $2,000. So there's no value there. They're just ripping off the customer. That's really what they're doing. There's no value. You have to give value to the customer. So the rich people that would pass away, that my great grandfather went to their house to buy clothes, he knew they had good clothes and he was selling used. So if he could get nice clothing in his store and he can sell a suit for $5 or $7, he was giving them good value. It was a decent price for a decent used suit that was probably lightly used because the rich people had a lot of clothes. They didn't have to wear the same suit every day. And back in those days, people dressed every single day. You couldn't go out of your house without a 3-piece suit and a top hat on, right? So they were always dressing. So that's how he got his inventory. And then years later, when my great grandfather couldn't work for whatever reason, he was sick or whatever, my grandfather took over. And then it was my grandfather who was the real pioneer. He was the one who started to make new clothes. 1930, he decided, I'm going to start selling new clothes. And we're going to do part of the store new and part of the store used. And his father, my great-grandfather, was so angry with him. He says, nobody's going to pay $10 for a suit. Nobody could pay the money. Don't do it. You're going to go out of business. You're going to ruin the business. But, my grandfather understood it was becoming a different generation. The Great Depression was over, and it was becoming a different generation. People wanted to buy new stuff, and they were willing to spend a little more money for new stuff. So my grandfather started to sell new clothes. And then as years went by, he had 4 brothers, and they all stayed in the business until my great-grandfather told the other sons, he said, listen, you guys all listen to Alfred. Alfred was my grandfather. And when their father told them to listen to Alfred, they all got pissed off, and they left. That's what happened. And my grandfather stuck with the clothing business, and he made a big success. He had a lot of stores on 14th Street, all men's clothing stores on 14th Street. Each one had a different name. That's what he had. But that's where he worked. So he wasn't about to get a store in Boston. That was not the mentality. He worked on 14th Street. He knew the customers there. So he said, okay, the store next to me is vacant. I'm going to get it. My store is called Phil's. I'm going to call that store Al's. That one's called Al's. I'm going to call the next one Bernard's, And that's basically what he did over and over and over. Except when he opened his store on Lexington Avenue, that was already uptown. That was 55th and Lexington Avenue. So they were always downtown. This was uptown. Now, uptown was a whole different ballgame. My father was now already working with his father. My father was a teenager working with his father already in the clothing business for a long time because everything was about the store. With my father, always everything was about the store. It was either about the family or about the store because, it was your business and you wanted to be successful. So when it's your business, many of you entrepreneurs listening to this podcast right now, if it's your own business, you take it home with you. The employees get to go, when you lock the door, they get to go home. And they could have their pizza and they could have their dinner and they can kick their feet up and watch TV. But when it's your business, you're thinking, okay, what do I got to do tomorrow? What did I forget to do today now that the store is closed that I got to go back in the morning and I got to finish? What alterations do we have to get ready for customers? This one has a business meeting. This one has a party. This one's leaving the country because they're a tourist. All that's got to be ready. You got to have it all done on time, right? And then in those years in the 70s and the 80s, it was a fashionable thing to break store windows in New York City. I remember with my father as being a kid, in the middle of the night, the phone would ring. Who is it? It's the alarm company from one of the stores, my grandfather's store, maybe my father's store. And middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, he's got to drive down to the city. You got to meet with the police. You got to call the glass company, and they would come with a big piece of plywood. They would board up your storefront because someone broke the glass because they're trying to steal something from the window. Even though if you had a gate, all the stores had gates back in those years. Even I had a gate on Fifth Avenue from 1992 to 2002. We had a gate, but the gate was on the inside of the glass. Back in those years, the gate was on the outside of the glass, right? So when you would close your store, you had to close the gates. That was a thing. Not a lot of stores these days have gates because, does somebody want to really steal a leather jacket from a clothing store window? You have to get in front of the store. You got to bust the glass, which is thick glass. You got to use a big hammer or something. Then you got to stick your hand in there with the broken glass and grab a leather jacket or whatever it might be. And how much you're really going to sell that leather jacket for these days? I mean, now there's so many, they rather steal an iPad or an iPhone or a laptop. Those are things that, people want to pay money for. People don't want to pay money for, a leather coat or a shearling coat. Those are the things that they would try and steal when you had those things in the window, cashmere coat. So in later years, in the late 80s, what we used to do is if we had one of those in the window, we used to pull it back away from the glass, even though we had a gate. We used to pull it back away from the glass. And I remember one time when I was a kid, my father got a phone call about my grandfather's store because my grandfather was not running down to the city in the middle of the night. My father had to do it. So I remember they got a call that somebody shot the storefront with bullets. So my father went down and I remember I went down with him. It wasn't in the middle of the night that time. That was like early in the morning. It was like 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. I don't know, maybe it was on a weekend. I didn't have school, something. I went down and sure enough, the front door of the store, which was a glass front door, I remember it very well. It was like a smoky gray glass front door. And it had this big bronze, this whole door handle, but it was very long. You could it was like almost like 3 or 4 feet. You could just pull on it to open up the door. And there was no door left. It was all in teeny little pieces on the ground, on the sidewalk, and just what was left was the door handle was laying there. It's like one of those types of, I guess it was those types of glass where like a car windshield that if it breaks, it's like a safety glass. It breaks up into these little pieces so you can't get cut by a big like sharp piece. It must have been like a safety glass. There was no door. The door was gone. The hinges were still on the wall, but the whole door was on the ground and the handle was down there. So I remember that being a kid, seeing that. And my father had to go down to the city many times, doing that. And he used to do a lot of buying for my grandfather's store. Because my grandfather was, those years he was going in the late afternoon and leaving early. And my father was really running the business already by then. So my father was doing all the buying. And I remember one time, my grandfather always did a lot of buying. He would buy like a crazy man. He bought so much inventory. It was insane how much inventory. He actually had to get a warehouse around the corner from his store, which was really like an office space. We called it the warehouse. And he had hanging clothing over there too, like another store. And the suits in his store, they were so tightly smashed together, you couldn't even pull a suit out. That's how tight the suits were in his store. It's not like today which is ridiculous today. You go into a retail store and they have like, oh, can I see my size? No, there's like 7 things on a rack. The rack is empty. There's nothing on the stupid rack, right? We had inventory. We hung a lot of inventory. And that's why I was saying people that are on Instagram today that are trying to sell all these custom suits, they don't want to have inventory because their barrier to entry is almost zero. Some factory on WhatsApp in China is contacting them because they see their Instagram. Constant. I get it constant all day. They get my number from LinkedIn or wherever they get my number on WhatsApp. We manufacture this. We manufacture that. We can make you tie. We can make you suit. We can make you jacket. We can make you all these different things. We can make. These people are getting the same solicitations that I get. And they say, oh, I could get into the clothing business. Look, these people have a factory. They're going to send me some swatch books. I don't even have to pay for the swatch books, right? Or they make you pay a couple of $100. And if you place a few orders, they'll give you back the money little by little on those few orders that you place. And right away, you're in business. They'll send you a video on YouTube, how to learn how to measure a man, how to learn how to measure for a jacket, how to learn how to measure pants, how to learn how to measure for a suit, how to learn how to do all those things. And then you try and get some customers using your social media, make some nice, posts and say, I'm in the clothing business, this and that. I worked 2 years in Gucci. I worked in Saks. I worked in Bloomingdale's. I worked in Neiman Marcus. And now I have my own company and I know everything about the clothing business and I know everything about how suits fit. And there's nothing that I don't know. So you better ask me because I'm the expert. And that's what's going on Instagram and on TikTok and on Facebook. Really, that's what's going on. So that's why they don't want to have any inventory because they don't want to spend any money. That's exactly why. So someone like me, I was already in the clothing business for so many years with big stores, with big inventory. Now I'm in the custom business, but only with my customers. I'm in the custom business, people that I know for the stores for many years. Somebody's emailing me, I saw your website. Can you make me a suit? I'm not going to see them anyplace. I'm just not going to do it. If somebody says, oh, I got your number from this guy, you made a suit for him, that's the person I'm gonna go see. That's how I work now. So, as years went on, my father was still always into big inventory, and his inventory was very expensive because he had all the big brand names before they were brands. We were the first to have Canali. We were the first to have Giorgio Armani. We were the first to have Valentino. We were one of the first to have Zegna. We were the first to have Brunello Cucinelli. We were the first to have, I can't even remember all the names. We were not one of the first to have Dolce & Gabbana, but we had it very early and it didn't sell well. It wasn't really our customer. Hugo Boss. We were one of the first to have Hugo Boss in New York, and we were the largest retailers of Hugo Boss from 1990 to 2000. For 10 years, we sold more Hugo Boss than anybody in all of New York. More than Bloomingdale's, more than Saks, anybody. And I can tell you stories about Hugo Boss too. But my father started with Hugo Boss. He really, he had, at that time I was in college. So my father opened his second store. He had this first store, British American House, 51st and Madison Avenue. It was at 488 Madison Avenue. And that store was there from the 70s until 2014. So he was working there most of that time. And then he opened up a second store in 1986. So about 6 or 7 years after he opened that one, he opened on 44th and Madison. Let's see, the Milstein family at that time was building the Bank of America building at 335 Madison Avenue. That building is still there. It's a very big, like reddish marble building. But in those years, it was a regular office building. Bank of America was in there and all kind of offices and retail stores on the bottom. And my father rented the retail store one off the corner. So it was and the lobby was in the middle. So it was the lobby and then my father's store, British American House 2, as it was known. And then there was a corner store. The corner store was a company called Alcott and Andrews. And they had some very nice things, but they went out of business. Oh, no, sorry. Alcott and Andrews was not on the corner. Oh, yeah, I think they were on. Yeah, they were on the corner. Alcott and Andrews was on the corner. They had some cool stuff. They had like some men's and women's and cardigans and stuff, but they didn't make it. So he opened up that second store and he had to buy a lot of inventory. And inventory from those expensive brands like Corneliani or Canali or even brands that you probably wouldn't know, but that were very expensive, like Antonio Fusco was a beautiful Italian brand. We had it. There was a brand of shirts called Liba, was Liba. Now, the guy that started with Liba shirts, his name was Massimo Bizzocchi. If you look up Massimo Bizzocchi today, he is the North American and South American president and CEO of Kiton. That's who Massimo is. Massimo, very smart guy in the clothing business, Italian. My father was very good friends with him. I don't think he'll hear this podcast, but my father was very good friends with him. My father went to his house in Italy for dinner. He came to our house to Italy. From Italy, we had dinner with him, and we always saw him in Italy, and a very nice guy. But he had an eye for picking out what is going to be the hottest next big thing. And he picked... the first thing he picked was Liba, the Liba shirts. Those were the shirts that was the factory that was making all the shirts for Giorgio Armani. If you remember, what's his name? I can't remember his name. The guy from the LA Lakers who was the coach who made famous those shirts with the part-rounded collars. He wore Armani suits all the time, his slick back hair. I don't know why I can't remember his name. But I'm getting old. Can't remember the guy's name. Anyway, that was Liba. That was a Liba shirt. That was made for Giorgio Armani. It was made in their factory, but they put the Armani labels on it. And Armani picked, obviously, the models that he wanted for his shirt. So we would buy the Liba shirt, but with the Liba factory label. And they had beautiful shirts and beautiful colors and patterns. And we had so many of those shirts. And Massimo was their sales rep for all of America. That's what he would do. Find a small brand in Italy, very good quality, and then he would bring it to America and hopefully make a big success out of it because he knew all the best stores to sell to, my father being one of them. And my father, like I said, was very good friends with Massimo. So then there was Liba shirts, and we had so many. There's so many things that when I'm doing the podcast, I can't remember off the top of my head. I'll have to write them down, and when I come back and do the next episode of this, because I'm going to continue doing this episode talking about my father and talking about how he advanced himself in the clothing business, being a pioneer in the business, and finding all the new brands that didn't exist. Also when he was first starting out, you couldn't deal with the brands directly because they didn't have any representation here. You had to deal with the agents. They had an agent. Like Massimo was an agent of particular brands, Kitan being one of them when he first brought Kitan to America. Also, Luigi Borelli he brought, and Suta Mantalassi he brought. And there was a belt company called Areghe, beautiful handmade belts, and Brioni eventually bought that factory. So the Brioni belts are made in the Areghe factory. So that's another interesting tidbit. So there were a lot of people over the years going to all the Italian clothing shows, and there was also New York shows. I used to go with my father all the time. There was a show called the Namsby Show. Namsby. NAMSB. I don't remember what it stood for, but it was the North American Men's something show, right? North American Men's Show. And that show was in New York City. I used to drive down to the city with my father on a weekend, like a Sunday, and we used to get a hot chocolate across the street from what used to be the Coliseum. Who remembers the Coliseum in New York City? What is there now? I know what's there now. I don't know if you could send me comments somehow through the podcast, but if you can, what is it? What is there now? Now it's the Time Warner Center. What was the AOL Time Warner? Now the Time Warner Center and the Mandarin Oriental Hotel in Columbus Circle. That was the Coliseum. And inside the Coliseum, they had trade shows. And one of them was the Namsby Show. And I used to go with my father and my grandfather. And there was men's clothing and men's shoes and a lot of cool stuff. And I remember those shows. And I liked going to those shows. It was fun. Picking the fabrics, looking at the shoes, seeing what colors you like. Even though I was a kid, my father used to let me pick. He said, Philip, which one do you like? Tell me, you like the blue one, you like the black one? You like this leather sole, or you like the rubber sole? Which ties? Pick a few ties you like. You like those ties? Okay, we'll get 4 of those and 4 of those and 4 of those and 4 of those. And he was basically teaching me, you learn by doing. He was teaching me all those years when I was just a little kid watching him. He was teaching me about how to be in the clothing business. Not that I had to do it when I got older. Not that I had to do it, but and I hated it back then. Let me tell you something. When I got older and a teenager and I had to go to work in the store, because that's what you did when you became a teen in my family, you had to go one day on the weekend to work in the store just to learn the business. You didn't have to do that. If you wanted to do something else, fine, but you had to do that one day. I would argue like crazy. I don't want to go. My friends and I want to stay with the friends, always with the friends. I want to go with the friends, or I want to go with the girlfriend someplace, or whatever it was. I want to go for a ride. I want to drive the car. But no, you couldn't do it. You had to go to the store. But because of that, I learned a lot of things. I learned about, negotiating deals. I learned about dealing with the public. I learned about helping. How many customers I helped over the years. Tens and tens of thousands of men and customers, and buying whatever it might be, even a little thing, even a tie, even a cufflinks. I watched my father, over many years. Somebody would come in, anybody who would come in, that was a customer, and you had to treat them like a customer, like they're going to buy something. You can't judge a book by its cover. You couldn't say, that guy's not buying anything. I'm not gonna help that guy. He's never going to buy anything. No, you had to say, hello, how are you? This is my store. What can I help you with? Oh, you need a tie. Sure, let me show you this tie. By the way, let me show you. You see this tie? I have a shirt that goes fantastic with this tie. And you know what? It doesn't matter what suit you have at home. You don't even have to tell me what suit you have at home, because this shirt and this tie is going to go with definitely 3 or 4 suits you might have. It goes with navy, it goes with charcoal gray, it goes with black, it goes with navy pinstripe. You can interchange between those suits, and you're going to get great use, not only the tie that you like that you came in for, but also this shirt. And what happens? 9 out of 10 times the guy says, okay, I'll get the shirt and the tie, because they like the combination together. Sometimes people don't like, I'm just going to buy a tie, and then, I got my old shirts and I got a new tie. That's horrible. Right? My father would say lousy. It's lousy. That's what he would say. One of his words is lousy. So, I used to have a customer who's very well known today in the real estate office space in New York City. I think he's the number one real estate broker for office space in New York and in other states. He works for a very big firm and he's able to sell real estate in all states across the country for office space. And he's not really a customer of mine now, but I'm in touch with him, over social media. And we talk sometimes. We're friendly. But I know him when he was first starting out, first starting in real estate. He was at 342 Madison Avenue, and we had our store at 335 Madison Avenue, was right across the street, right across the street from us. So, what interesting thing about him was he used to come to the store a lot, all the time. Like every couple of days he would come in and he would say, "Oh my God, the shirt and tie that I have on, I hate it. I hate this shirt and tie. You got to pick out a new shirt and tie for me. I don't like this shirt and tie. I need a new one." So we would go through the shirts and ties, depending on what suit that he had on that moment. And we would pick out a new shirt and tie. Now, he would spend $300 on a shirt. And for those years, like in the early 90s, that was a lot of money. $295, $250, for a shirt, whatever it might have been. And but not every shirt was that price. We had $150, $110. We had all prices. But and he would spend $75, $85 on a tie, right? And in the store, he would change the shirt and the tie. And then he would walk out, go back to his office with a brand new shirt and tie on. So over time, in my basement where I had the tailor shop, I had like 3-4 tailors in that particular store. I had a rack of his old shirts and his old ties, right? And I would say, "Hey," I don't want to mention names, but I'll call him Steve. "Steve, I'm just giving you a call. I got like a dozen shirts and ties of yours in the basement. What do you want me to do with them?" He said, "Give it away." Eventually, he doesn't want it anymore because he bought all new stuff. He doesn't want it. Just, give it away to somebody. But here's the interesting thing. To get him to buy a suit over $800, that was tough. I couldn't get him to buy a suit over $800, no matter how hard I tried. And I would joke around with him because I knew the pattern already. The shirt and tie, the price didn't really matter. The suit, that mattered. That price mattered. He mostly bought on sale because obviously the prices on sale were better. Those years, I'm talking $600, $700, $800, $900. The most expensive suit in the store might have been $1,295 or $1,395. Maybe there was a suit for $1,800 or $1,900, something super, super special. But the most expensive was probably just over $1,000. If you made a good sale with a guy, if you sold him a suit for $1,295 and $995 and $795, you made a great sale with somebody. Now, as we all know, the prices became insane. And we could talk about pricing in another episode, but the prices became just crazy. So, my father was also, all these customers, they knew my father because they started seeing him. I came after. They started seeing him. He was the one who cultivated all the business in the beginning. It was just him and another salesman with him and the tailor in the shop. And they slowly built that business over the years. Of course, they had a good location, and he had the eye for picking very good, very high quality merchandise, whether people knew the names or not. In the early 80s, the names were not big. People were not coming in and saying, "I got to have Hugo Boss. I got to have Laura Piana. I got to have this one. I got to have that one." Nobody knew the names of anything. It was all about, it was made in Italy. It was nice quality. It was no polyester. It was 100% wool. It had a nice fit. You had a good tailor in the store. That was very important. It wasn't just about, here's the clothes, but you had to have a good tailor to do tailoring for you to fit all the customers. That was also important. So not only did my father have to be able to pick nice clothes, but you had to know good tailoring because you had to be able to pick a tailor and say, "This is a good tailor." How do you know if it's a good tailor if you're not a tailor? You had to hang around tailors for a long time. Right? I'm not a tailor. Sometimes some of my customers, they call another friend of theirs and they say, "Oh, my tailor, you got to go see my tailor. He's a great guy. He'll make a great suit for you. It's real custom. You could design it yourself, make your own pockets. You could do a lot of things that nobody else can do. You can make a beautiful coat with mink on the inside. You could do all that stuff, whatever you want." But I'm not a tailor actually who could do the work, but I know tailoring, because I've done. When I had my own store on 3rd Avenue and 59th Street, I had a whole building there on 59th and 3rd Avenue. I did every fitting of every customer that was in that store. I did all the fittings for everybody. So I could pin the garments. I know exactly what has to be done. And then I tell the tailor what I want him to do. And that's also what I do now. I work with a tailor that I have. And when I do all my fittings, I go to the tailor and I say, "This is what I want you to do." Because tailors are selling tailoring. If you go to an outside tailor, right? This is my father told me once. So here's another thing my father told me once. If you go to an outside tailor, right? Tailors are selling tailoring. What are they selling? They're selling their time to do tailoring. So whether you know, sure, you go in, my sleeves are too long. Could you make my sleeves shorter? Sure, you know you need your sleeves shorter because they're too long. You might not know how short or long you want it. And honestly, the tailor doesn't know what the fashion is either. See, we knew what the fashion was. So, and we knew how the tailoring had to be done. So we were able to tell the tailor exactly what to do, not only so your suit would fit right, so that would also be within the fashion of today's times, how it's supposed to look when you're wearing it, not to have your pants at your ankles, right? Right. So my father was very keen and very in tune with all of those things, and I learned it from him. Learned tailoring by watching the tailors work in the tailor shop, but also watching the fittings with the customers and how he would fit the customer, how he would put the jacket. There's a certain way you put the jacket when the customer's trying on. How do you put the jacket on the customer so it fits properly? Make sure the collar's not crooked. Make sure the button is lined up. The button with the buttonhole has to line up properly so it sits right on the chest, so it sits right on the shoulders. And let me tell you something, and I'm talking already for 1 hour, and I said, I'll continue again with more of these stories about my father and about the clothing business in the next episode, which I'll do in a couple of days. I'm not going to take all this time because I really want to memorialize my father and a lot of these podcast posts for this podcast. And look, I hope I'm doing an okay job of it. Believe me. So there's a certain way that when you actually put the garment on the customer, that it'll sit right, it'll lay right, it'll fit right. So when he looks in the mirror, it looks correct. Right? So when the tailor comes up and the tailor says, I see what needs to be done. Okay, his shoulder is one lower on one side. We got to put a little pad. He needs a little sleeve a tiny bit shorter. We'll do the cuffs or the plain bottom on the pants. The waist is fitting good. The buttons are all aligned. And that's all the tailor has to do. Very minimal type of stuff, right? But outside tailors that you're going to for work, they're selling tailoring. It's like the dentist. Like sometimes you go to the dentist, right? You don't know if you have a cavity. Like when there's a little kid, the dentist says, your kid has a cavity. We got to do a filling. It's $300. Do you know if there's a cavity there? You don't know. So you say, okay, do the filling. And the dentist takes the drill, zip, 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 3-4 minutes. Okay, we did it. And you pay $300. Just like a car mechanic. If you're not a mechanic, or you're not in tune with that stuff, he says, we got to change. What does Sebastian Maniscalco always say? Right? You thought we could wax it out. No, we got to do the whole side of the car all over again. He always says that. So it's the same kind of thing. If you don't know tailoring, an outside tailor, I'm not saying everybody does this, believe me, but they're selling tailoring. That's what they have to sell. The more items they want to fix for you, the more money they can make from you. But when you have somebody who really knows tailoring and also knows the fashion of the garments, that's a whole different ballgame. So listen, I hope you enjoyed this informative, hopefully, podcast, a little bit about the family history, a little bit about my father. I'm going to do another episode very shortly. Going to continue talking about my father, who just recently passed away. If you didn't listen to the beginning of the podcast, it's only been 2 weeks since he's gone. So look, it's going to be very fresh for a long, long, long time for me because we worked together for 30 years. Every day we spoke on the phone. Every day was about the store. Every day was about the clothing. Every day was about the customers. Every single day. So, and I hope at the end of all of this, you'll know that I have what do they call that when you have a piece of artwork, right? That you got to know where the artwork comes from. What's that called? The provenance. That I have the provenance of being in this clothing business more than any of those guys on Instagram. I don't care who they are. I've seen them. I've seen almost all of them, I bet. And most of them don't know what they're talking about at all. And some people I comment, most of them I don't comment because it doesn't make any sense because I have to comment the whole story to say what they're saying, why they're saying is not exactly the right thing. But people like to come up with their own mantra. So let them have their own mantra, no problem. So thank you for listening. I appreciate it. If you're not subscribed to my podcast, it's all been done before. Please do. I will get back to the regular sort of podcast I do, but not for a little while. I do want to talk about what I'm talking about now. And I'm not going to do any intro, outro music for these few episodes. And listen, everybody, have a happy, healthy new year. If you don't have your health, you don't have anything. And it is January 1st, 2026. And I'll be on social media a lot this year. I made up my mind. Going to show you a lot of new things we're doing. And we're doing a lot of leather for Hermes belts because I have customers that wear Hermes belts, and they told me, guess what? Hermes won't sell me the belt without the buckle, and I don't want the buckle. I got 10 buckles. All I need is the leather. So we're making leather for the Hermes, and should be nice and not expensive, like $150. So that's pretty good. Value. Remember what I said? Value. What my father taught me. Value. Okay, everybody, take it easy, and I'll see you all again in the next podcast.